Alright, now we want to find out what happens when we activate the solenoid valve with 12 volts. Okay, so we have 12 volts here from our Accusump battery in the trunk, and we have it connected to a toggle switch. And now that it's activated, it's open, and we can indeed verify that if we blow into it, it flows freely from both sides. And if we close it, turn the power back off, if we try to blow in it, we can't blow at all with just our mouth because the check valve takes some pressure to activate. And as we learned last time, when we use the air compressor, we can verify that indeed when it's closed, it still is a check valve, so that one-way direction of flow from the engine is allowed. And again, that keeps the maximum amount of pressure stored in the Accusump. So going with the EPC switch in place, which I will add once I figure out after I rebuild the engine, which I'm immediately planning soon, what my hot idle oil pressure is, I can select the proper EPC valve. Actually, the EPC switch, we should call it. It's just a sensor. The only valve is this solenoid valve. So what happens is when you add the EPC switch, it is in series with the 12 volt connection to the solenoid valve. So when you hit the toggle switch, it doesn't necessarily turn it on. It will interrupt that 12 volt signal. It will only connect that 12 volt signal when it senses the lower pressure on the engine side than in the Accusump, or actually a pressure below a certain amount of pressure, say 25 psi if you pick that valve. So when it only then when it gets below 25 psi of oil pressure will it allow the Accusump to drain and recharge to the engine. So with that, so normally if you do not have the EPC valve, then you leave this on the track, you leave this guy wide open all the time, so that if for some reason you ever get yellow flag on the track and you slow down and you're just cruising and you have lower oil pressures, those lower oil pressures will lose some pressure in the Accusump because this guy is just wide open all the time. So let's say after just cruising you hit it hard on a corner in the next corner, and then your oil pressure in the engine as it's rising is some of that's being stolen to, one, recharge the Accusump, and then if two, it doesn't reach the high enough pressure that you would want, then and you immediately cavitate after that first corner, then you may have a problem. So what the EPC switch does is if you put that in, it keeps this guy closed most of the time, essentially all the time, and it only opens it when you actually need it, and therefore guarantees that when you need it, it's at its maximum pressure. So let's say normally your oil pressure on the track when you're cruising from, not cruising, when you're using it from 4,000 to 6,000 RPM, your oil pressure might go from 50 to 80 psi or something like that. And with the EPC switch, as soon as your oil hits 80 psi once, for a few seconds probably, it will pressurize the Accusump to that and keep that in there. And then if you ever do cavitate, that's when the EPC switch will allow this guy to open and give you life-saving oil pressure. So there you go. It works like we thought and hoped, and it will provide some life-saving insurance for the next investment into the engine.